Today we are going to make a bread-based pizza. So I've started off with 300 grams of strong white flour or bread flour in my bowl. And to that I am going to add a big teaspoon of sugar and half a teaspoon of salt. And we're keeping all of these separate, and I'll explain the reason why in a minute. So just half a teaspoon of salt. And then I am just going to use a packet of fast-acting yeast. You can also get pots of it as well, where you just use the amount that you require. So I'm just going to put that in. Keep that away from the salt, because the salt can affect the functioning of the yeast. So we don't want that to happen. And then ready, I have got some warm water. So I've just used tap water, so it's kind of hand hot. I'm just going to mix together. I'm going to incorporate the yeast and the sugar there and the flour, but I'm just leaving the salt to the side for now. So, and then just making a well so that you can see that I have created just a well, a dip in my flour where I am going to pour my warm water. So 225 millilitres of warm water, so hand hot water. I'm going to add the majority of it and then stop, just because it's knowing how absorbent your flour is and taking on how much liquid. And the scales on the side of the plastic jugs aren't exactly fantastic. So I'm just using a fork to bring that together. So the reason why we use strong flour, we're using bread flour, is because it's got higher gluten content. And gluten is what gives the structure. So the flour is there for the bulk, it's your main ingredient, but it's going to give the structure. So it usually provides us with carbohydrate, but the gluten is a protein that we find inside our flour. Okay, so to make bread we want it so that it's nice and springy, so we're going to use a stronger or higher gluten content flour rather than plain flour, which you would use for pastry, or self-raising flour, which you would use for cakes, because you want a softer texture to it. So once that's come together, pull it off the fork, and then you're going to bring it together into your hand. So I didn't necessarily need to use all of the liquid. And then you are just going to turn it out onto a work surface. And just add a bit of flour. So just put some flour to the side, just so it's not going to stick too much. You don't want to add too much flour into it, because that will cause it to go tougher. Okay, so as I've said, the strong flour is because it's got a higher gluten content. The yeast is what's going to make it rise. So there's fast-acting yeast, there's easy bake yeast, or you could get some fresh yeast from the baker. And that is going to produce carbon dioxide. And dried yeast obviously needs to be brought back to life. So we need to add that liquid for that yeast to start coming together. And that then produces carbon dioxide. So the sugar is required because we need to feed the yeast. So like all living things, they need food. So they start off with that sugar, which is the glucose, and it gives that instant energy to start respiring and producing carbon dioxide until it can break down the starches in the flour into their energy source of sugar. We also need to make sure that the water is warm, so warm, hand hot, about 37 degrees, because that is the optimum temperature that yeast needs to grow, okay, like most living things. So if you put boiling water in it, you would kill the yeast, and your yeast would not work and it wouldn't produce carbon dioxide. So you need to make sure it's warm. If it was too cold, again, it would take too long to work, and we just want it so that it's coming together quite quickly. Our salt is added there for flavour, but it can inhibit the production of carbon dioxide from the yeast, so we need to be careful with that. Gluten is shaped like springy coils. Okay, so the reason why we're kneading it is because we want to get that gluten structure into kind of like nice crisscrosses. Okay, so we're getting it so that we're stretching out those springy coils and getting them to create a nice network so that when the carbon dioxide is produced, it will get trapped into that network, and then it will expand with heat inside the oven as well. Okay, so we're kneading it so that you're folding it and stretching it and folding it and stretching it, and you're kneading it for about 5 to 10 minutes until it comes smooth. So you can see the difference in my dough now to what it looked earlier. It's still not quite ready. It just needs a little bit longer because it needs to be a bit smoother. But as I said, try not to use too much flour. Just make sure you flour your hands a bit, and your worktop, if you use too much flour, that will cause it to become tough. So you're just kneading until it's soft. Once your dough is kneaded and it's soft and it bounces back up when you touch it, that's then ready to work with. Okay, if we were making a bread roll, like a loaf of bread or bread rolls, now you wouldn't leave it to prove. So you would make sure that you'd scraped and washed your bowl out, put a bit of oil inside your bowl, put your dough into the bottom of the bowl so that it can grow up the sides of the bowl with the oil, and just cover it with some cling film or a damp cloth and leave that to prove until it's doubled in size. But with pizzas, we don't necessarily need it, so it's quite as big. So I am going to roll it out and then leave it to prove a bit whilst I'm preparing my toppings. Now I am going to make 3 small pizzas with my dough, so I am going to split it into 3 and then roll each one out. So if you have got a round tin, or if you're wanting circular pizzas, just knead it to get it to come together into a nice ball first, because if you start off with a round, it makes it a little bit easier. You might need a touch more flour, so get some on your rolling pin. You might just need a little bit underneath to prevent it from sticking. And then you are just going to roll it out. It will spring back initially, so you do need to keep on rolling it. So turning it round and keeping it on the move so that it doesn't stick to your worktop, and it makes it a bit more of a regular shape. Don't go too much for perfection on your shape on your worktop, because you are going to have to pick it up and put it onto your baking tray. So we're kind of wanting it so it's about the right size. So this is now about 100 grams of flour, so we don't want it too big. So once you've got it into a round, if you're struggling to get it into a round, if you curve your hand and put it next to your bread and the other one press down and out, you can then shape it so that it will come back together, or just stretching it out a bit more. Okay, so once you've got it at your desired thickness, remembering that it will still rise a bit, you can then put it onto a baking tray. So either a baking tray or a pizza tray like I've got here, and I'm just going to use a touch of oil. You can always do it with a little bit of flour as well, and then just rubbing that onto my tray so it's lightly greased. Just putting my pizza base onto the tray, and this is where you can then work on your shape if you're wanting to go for perfection. If there's a rustic look, then that's fine. Okay, so that's then, you're now ready to prepare your topping. Quick tomato base. I've just got some passata, but you could also use some tinned chopped tomatoes. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of tomato puree into that. I might need to add some more depending on the thickness and the consistency. I'm just going to add a little bit of oregano into it just to give it some flavour, and then stirring that together to give you that consistency. If you wanted to do it where you fried off some onions and garlic and then added some tinned tomatoes and cooked it down that way to soften the tomato flavour, you could do it that way. Obviously you could make a barbecue sauce, you could put pesto on the bottom, you could make whatever kind of pizza that you chose to make. Okay, so you're just looking for a spreading consistency, so not too thin, not too thick. So you can see I've got a load of toppings prepared. You can make whatever choices that you want to, and then we are just going to arrange them on the top of our pizza. So you can see I've got onions, peppers, mushrooms, chilies, olives, ham, my tomato topping, some grated cheddar and some broken up mozzarella. You can use grated mozzarella as well if you wish, and make it up however you want to. So once all of your pizzas are ready to go in the oven, you need to put them into a preheated oven, which is on 200 degrees C or gas mark 6 for about 15 minutes until the pizza base is cooked underneath and all of your cheese is nicely golden brown and melted. Okay, so once your cheese is melted and if you look underneath and your base is cooked all the way through, that is when your pizza is ready and you are ready to serve. Enjoy.